Great, now we've got recording started. All right, so welcome to our second Alumni Masterclass. This is a series that we debuted this quarter. We'll be continuing in the winter, and what I would really love to hear from anyone who wants to supply ideas is what kind of content you would like moving forward in the future. We have another one of these sessions coming in December. I'm really blanking on what it is. It might be project managing the job search. I'm not sure, but you can find that in Handshake, and I'm currently planning all of our winter quarter events right now. Today we're going to be talking about networking in the age of social distancing because it has offered a really unique opportunity, the pandemic and the way we're largely working remotely. While a lot of us are looking at a kind of challenging economy, there's some things that we can kind of take advantage of right now as far as networking, and some things that are changing quickly around the practice of networking. I'm gonna diminish this real quick just so we have so I can get the whole slide on the screen. So the reason that this slide really starts with networking into the fields that interest you is that in a challenging economy like this, and with the disruption that we've seen, not just tech, but across the board, there's a lot of possible mobility, and there's a lot of emerging practices and industries right now. So I think it's important to keep in mind, like, we're building a network in the fields that we're currently in, but we're also building a network for the future. We're building a network into emerging fields and emerging practices. So I think it's important to think through your network and how diverse it is, really, in terms of the kinds of roles you might be interested in 2 years from now, 6 years from now, etc. The other thing is, because, like, I talk about this like an opportunity, but we also have to remember that, especially doing this on November 4th, really draws into attention. We're all in a little bit of a stressful situation, regardless of where you are on the spectrum. And this disruption is impacting everyone. So we want to just kind of point that out. That's really for my undergrads more than anything. But it's important to think through, like, we're in this together. We kind of have to be cognizant of the fact that even folks who are doing really well professionally are still experiencing a lot of disruption and anxiety. So I think it's really starting with empathy is a point that we would make sure that we leave with tonight, so that we can understand that the networking isn't transactional, it really is relationship building. It's also useful to have a specific goal or a call to action in the networking steps that we take. So in terms of why networking is important, if you're here, it's not necessarily something I have to explain, but we do have some data to back it up in terms of, in theory, pre-pandemic, 85% of jobs were filled by networking of some kind, meaning many of those jobs were never posted. And that's important because in a challenging economy like we're in right now, jobs are going to get more applicants. The posted jobs are going to get more applicants, which just means that we have to be as strategic and tactical as possible about how we approach job search, whether we're looking for a new job or whether we were laid off, etc. It is important to spend time networking. When I'm working with graduating seniors, they often put very little time into networking, exclusively doing the search. And I'm like, well, you're missing a good portion of the jobs that are out there just doing the search. So our main topics for tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about LinkedIn. LinkedIn actually just switched around the UX of their site, like the actual, I'm sure you've noticed the backgrounds have changed a little bit, and those changes will continue to happen. I'll talk a little bit about the Alumni Sharing Knowledge program at DePaul, and then I'll talk about informational interviews, specifically professional orgs, and how to use social media to connect to your network. Like I said, I'm totally comfortable for anyone to, like, unmute and just ask a question or throw it in the chat. I'll keep this little window open so I can see if anything pops up in there. So one thing you'll see in this presentation, throughout the presentation, I tried to provide some screenshots of some of the resources we built last year. We have over 50 handouts in our career library. This LinkedIn Basics handout, and we'll talk beyond basics, but this LinkedIn Basics handout is on our website, and it's available for folks who just want to kind of look through some of the things that I'm talking about tonight. We also have a lot of advanced content on that site as well, particularly thinking through the fact that, I mean, a third of DePaul students work full-time. So it's not like when I go into an appointment meeting with someone who's a junior, they might be 10 years into their profession. and they're finishing their degree at DePaul. So we have a lot of content that's not just for, 18-year-old freshmen. We have stuff that kind of builds across the board. So in terms of LinkedIn, the biggest mistake people make on LinkedIn is recreating their resume, in a very traditional format on LinkedIn. That's really not the point of LinkedIn. You don't take full advantage on LinkedIn if you do that. So we are going to go through some of the sections. My real pro tip for LinkedIn is find someone in your area of interest who's killing it and do everything they do. Like truly, it is industry specific. We'll get into that in a minute. But in terms of what you can do with LinkedIn, I think people really underuse LinkedIn as far as exploration, like keeping on top of trends around pathways and employers, emerging employers, and then of course opportunities. LinkedIn's job board is massive. Like I think you could successfully do a job search exclusively on LinkedIn. I wouldn't recommend it, but you could. But in addition, there's a lot of algorithm on LinkedIn that will guide you to other employers and other pathways because of the clicks that you're clicking on and the text in your profile. Obviously, LinkedIn's main purpose is connecting. I think it's important to think through connecting with peers, thinking as well as folks who are maybe in more advanced parts of their career, and as well as targeting alumni. I think that's a good strategy. And it's also really important in terms of building a brand. This is where LinkedIn differs most from your resume, in that the conventions of LinkedIn are much more visual and individualized. So you can actually build a bit of a brand through the way you talk about yourself on LinkedIn, tonally, word choice, even visually. All right, so these are all the parts of the profile. Some of these things have changed in like the last three years or so. So do look in and see how, if you have gone in and added all the things you need to do. One thing I'll point out for skills and experience in particular is that used to be or expertise, sorry, that used to be a nice to have, but now it feeds into that algorithm, and I think it's a really underused category. We'll talk about that in a minute too. We'll get onto LinkedIn and take a look. In terms of the photo, I think it's important to make sure it looks like you now, because I think that's something we see a lot, particularly with alum. I see photos, like who wants to change their photo? If they liked it and they put it up there, I don't want to change it. I'm actually guilty of this right now, and I talked to a colleague about it today. But I think having a photo that looks like you now, that has, I think a lot of us overthink it in terms of it. Depending on your profession, it doesn't have to be anything other than something that looks like you and then kind of conveys a little bit of your brand. So for really conventional industries, like some particularly conservative, like accounting or something like that, you're going to probably be wearing a suit. You're going to think really carefully about what you're wearing for that. For other areas, more creative spaces, maybe it just shows a little bit about your style and who you are. This is a really pro tip for anyone who is starting to feel like age is a factor in their search. And for me, that happened the last time I moved professions. I was interviewing with folks who were younger than me. I think this is a really underused space to really depict yourself as like, not necessarily on trend, but to really carefully curate that photo so that you kind of and I don't mean de-age it in terms of like wrinkles, but so that you actually like look like someone who is right at the top of their game in their industry. I think it's meaningful to do that, because if I'm going to click in on your LinkedIn profile, there's bias. There's a lot of stuff that we have to navigate, but we also want to be our authentic selves, and that's a balance. In terms of the headline, we'll get into some examples, but I think it's helpful to really manage that. Now, sometimes it'll default to your current job title, and you can change that to, for my seniors, I say, why not put emerging professional or emerging marketing professional, or just put marketing professional interested in blah, blah, blah. I think it's a space to really say something about who you are. It's not a bad idea, though, to just say what you are. So this example on the right, Celeste Mora, social strategist at Grammarly, great. That is not going to be a bad thing at all to have a really simple headline there, but it is an opportunity. In terms of summaries, now this summary is really long. If you do a longer summary, she's a writer, so it makes a little more sense for hers to be longer. Do be aware that it will crop it, and then I'll have to actively click more to read the whole thing. So be really attentive to what happens at the top of that text. But really, this is who you are, what motivates you, what you're skilled at, what's next. I think one of the challenges as a summary is if you're open to a couple different industries, you have to create a summary that works across all of those. And that can be challenging, but there's lots of great examples. All right, in terms of experience, I think most people should avoid the bulleted resume accomplishment statements that you would normally have on a resume, because the benefit, you can really, most folks are using kind of these shorter paragraphs. Some people, actually quite a few people, don't have a job description at all if their job title is like kind of clear enough what you're doing, but I would keep it relatively short. The other thing is rich media is a great opportunity for folks to really kind of create immediacy around some of the language they're using. As a screen reader, I'm going to look at a picture before I'm going to look at the text. So I think we should be using the rich media more than we are right now in that experience section. Organizations you can take advantage of organizations in the LinkedIn profile. Obviously education, you're going to take advantage of that. This is kind of more of our standard advice for our undergraduate population. And then of course these sections. Now skills is one I want to talk about right now because that is going to feed into your algorithm. Let me actually escape out of that and get into LinkedIn. Sorry, I talk fast and I talk a lot, so feel free to ask questions, etc. Yeah, there is a comment in the chat about getting professional photos taken. Totally worth it. Totally worth it. And if you want to share publicly contact, feel free to do that. I'm just going to go into mine real quick just to kind of talk a little bit about the skills section. You can add up to 50 skills. So the view obviously is my private view. Let me get into skills. So I maxed out on skills very specifically because what I realized was that once I went into jobs and I was looking at, let's say, this role, I'm sure I'm not qualified for this. But what it will tell you when you get into a role on LinkedIn, it will tell me whether or not I match. And in this case, I have 9 of the 10 top. Now, let me just give one word of advice on premium. It's really expensive. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing the free version for a month. If you do that, I just make sure you put it in your calendar, unless you want to pay for the service. I know some folks who are in a job search who are paying for it, but take full advantage of that free month that you get. But even without paying, I do see a little bit, are my skills matching up with these jobs? The one thing that I actually have been trying to figure out, and I'm going to have some employer engagement folks help me figure this out, is what do the employers see? I'd be curious what the employer view is of, like, let's say I applied for this for my profile. Do they see check mark next to the skills? There's a world where that's the case, and I think it's important to really take advantage of that skills section. And, you know, endorsements, definitely a nice to have, but not a must have, really. I mean, it's all like in layers, really. So obviously courses, that's going to be important for current undergrads or recent graduates, significantly less important for anyone who's been out for a little while. Again, same thing with projects. Recommendations and endorsements are great. You don't have to have them. I'm going to show you one LinkedIn really quickly before I get out of there that I have one gal in my network who I worked with. Sorry, I never know how to spell. There we go. Who just really, I love what she does on her LinkedIn. So when I'm showing alumni LinkedIn profiles that I think do a great job, I show hers. I'm going to put her little contact in here for everyone. It's not the only way to do it. And depending on where you're at in your career, she's a little bit younger than me, but she's been in her like career interests align with mine. So I look at hers and go, I love what she's doing. You might have someone else who you love what they're doing, and it's a little bit different because they're in a different industry. So you can see her about is really just pretty conversational. It's fairly long, but like I'm choosing to read it or not read it. She's very active on LinkedIn. That's another piece. Like the more active you are, I get to see some of this content pop up, and you look like someone who's like really part of the professional community, her activity. And then she does a pretty good job in terms of her experience. And what I love about her is that she has this time period where she moved from Boston to San Francisco, and she does a good job capturing that here so that it really does, there's no visible gap. And I think she does a good job. She also really does a great job of this rich media because she's just really mastering LinkedIn. I'm gonna quickly, I'm gonna show you my husband's because his demonstrates how different industries work. So this is his, he works in advertising. Would I ever suggest someone put a picture of my grumpy son in the background? No, I would not. But in advertising, in his headline, Save Farscape, I mean, this all works in that industry. I can't relate to the creative freedom you can have here, but this is a great example of how I might have my little set of rules for you on LinkedIn, but depending on your industry, they're going to be either more conservative or more liberal, or, you know, do you have to have a sense of humor? How do you get your media on here? What are your actions on LinkedIn? You know, most of his networking, he certainly has networking on LinkedIn, but he's doing it in these other ad boards as well. So I use him as a kind of contrast to what you think of as the rules on LinkedIn, knowing that that's only in certain industries where you would kind of work like that. Any questions about LinkedIn? Like I said, I talk a lot. All right, let's talk about alumni sharing knowledge. I know this is already 20 minutes in, and I don't want to just like exhaust you guys. But if you don't know what it is DePaul's platform. Is this, oh, I thought I hyperlinked this. Oh, I think it is hyperlinked 100%. Let me make this work. It's DePaul's platform for alumni to provide, oh, it didn't hyperlink. Let me show you what it looks like. If you haven't logged in before, it is current students and alumni have access to it. And it's a great tool for both mentoring students, if you have interest in that, or finding alumni contacts and mentors. The benefit, like LinkedIn is important and necessary. The benefit that DePaul Ask Network has is that these folks are on here for that reason. So I think it's a really important, and we're growing it right now. Like I do think this will expand greatly. But I think you should be active or at least present in both spaces. Now, in terms of networking on the DePaul Ask Network, I'm already logged in. This is why I got this screen like this. I can search for folks based on industry. Let's do advertising just to see what we got. And like I said, every single person on here is here either to mentor or be mentored, or at least network. Like it's not necessarily like even a formal relationship. So let's look at, I'm gonna find someone and I'll just show you how to read their profile. Let's look at Abigail Baker. Okay, so once you kind of start to identify folks, you can see on their profile what they make themselves available for, because they check a bunch of boxes when they sign up saying they're available to help you look at the resume or talk about trends. These are their industries. And then when you decide to message someone, it will actually, this tool will send an email directly to her email. And that's another thing that's different from LinkedIn. Obviously, you can message on LinkedIn. You can contact on LinkedIn. I like to use the connect button as my messaging tool so that I don't have to pay for messaging. But you can, it'll give you advice on how to write an email. And these are the templates it provides. And it's a really nice tool. This directly then sends communication to her email that she provided when she signed up. And everyone on here is truly here for this purpose. So it's kind of a low stakes entry point for having these conversations. All right, in terms of what those conversations look like, this is probably really basic for you guys, but I just wanted to make sure that, you know, I covered it, particularly since I'm going to be recording this. Really, the first step for any kind of networking is informational interview. I mean, you can certainly kind of have other conversations. This is like the baby step. It's also very low stakes because people like talking about themselves. So you're not asking for a lot. Not only that, but we're all trapped at home on our computers. So I think that there's an access that we didn't have before because we're kind of, there are limited things for us to do with our time right now during the pandemic. But anyway, you're really just going to be asking about their experience, their pathway. That's why it's so important to target folks at different stages of their career. So if I talk to someone who entered accounting 20 years ago, they won't always know what that entry point looks like now, but they will know someone who does. So I think it's important to look at folks who are maybe at your level, maybe folks who who have something in common with you in terms of, were they a pivoter? How did they make this pivot happen? Did they need visa sponsorship? Did they need any of this? So like, I do think it's useful to look at folks who have experience that relates to yours, but think about different levels. So this is what a sample request would look like. Obviously you wouldn't introduce yourself as a student, but really like, I'm just learning. I'd love to hear more about this employer. Let me know if you have time. I'd love to check in with you over Zoom or whatever. It's worst case scenario, they're just not going to reply. Or you just, you know, maybe they're not available. We have on this handout, I don't want to go through all of it, but on this particular handout on our library, we also have a bunch of sample questions and some other tips about following up. All right, let's talk about professional orgs. Again, little screenshot of our handout. This is like the first professional org handout, so it's not super advanced, but it kind of goes through why to engage with the professional association. Even in my industry, in higher education career services, there's really, I mean, there's a couple professional orgs, but there's really only one game in town, like one professional association that everyone is part of. And it's been wildly useful interacting with folks through NACE, which is our professional association. But what's interesting to me is that professional association only benefits when it serves students, when it serves practitioners, when it serves people navigating, entering the field. Like, they are really designed to educate and to provide advice and resources for networking. So in general, what I would do, if you haven't already done it, curate a list of professional organizations. And again, this goes into, are there fields that you're considering? Like, for example, ed tech is in an explosion right now because of the pandemic. Maybe you're looking at your job and you're saying, hey, I wonder what someone in my role would do in ed tech. Like, so this is a great way to also start to look at other organizations or other professions and industries. But these are the kinds of things you'll get with those professional associations: networking opportunities, career resources. A lot of professional associations, not all, but particularly in the nonprofit sector, are doing significantly more free events and webinars and things like that than they have in the past. So that's something good to note. Like, some of these memberships can be really expensive. I'm not saying invest a ton of money. They're not all going to be worth it. You know, I know of some in certain industries, like AIGA is always going to be worth it. It's the best professional association for designers, but not every professional association is going to be worth the dues. So I don't want anyone to leave thinking I have to join one, but just at least be aware of the ones in your industry and what opportunities they have that are low cost or that might be worth it. All right, let me go to here. All right, social media. Now, this is the one that when I'm talking to undergrads, they're like, yeah, duh. But when I'm talking to people my age, they're like, are you seriously a hashtag? But in between, obviously, like, anyone younger than me probably knows that this is more intuitive. But it is really important to really take full advantage of social media. This is another good example of us all being trapped in this space, this digital space. And that means a lot of conversations are happening in the space around trends and around areas that could be beneficial to you in your career or job search or networking search. Let me hide this again real quick. And this is pre-pandemic, 48% use social media as a way to search for their current job. If you have a target employer, yes, you need to be following them for many, many reasons. Number one, they're going to post stuff, but they're going to post positions likely, but number two, that's how you start to build alignment with that brand. A couple of ways to use social media. Some folks do put it like on LinkedIn. Obviously, a lot of people post looking for a certain kind of opportunity. This obviously doesn't work if you haven't told your current employer. So those are the folks that don't do this, but it's perfectly acceptable for that to be on your LinkedIn or to use your social media for that. And in fact, I've seen, like, I don't know why, but for some reason I follow a lot of people in publishing on Twitter, and I've seen people get interviews through a Twitter exchange about publishing and about opportunities. So that's really exciting. It's going to be different in different industries. Also, you're really going to be able to join industry conversations and really track thought leaders. And tracking thought leaders is beneficial to you because when you interview or when you are in a room and networking, you're going to know the current conversation because frankly, a lot of it's going to be happening in these spaces. The other thing is, and not everyone has to use Instagram, and we made this presentation before Facebook bought it, but I think it is, if you're interested in a role that actually has like the employer is using Instagram actively, this is my favorite tip for folks who are unsure about what to wear for a job interview, or what like the work culture is. I'm always like, follow them on Instagram and see what their employees are wearing when they're doing events and what they want. Cause this is a curated, presentation. What are they saying about themselves as an employer? So there's some research you can do. It's also like a lot of folks, like I said, thought leaders are on social media. If you're someone who's passionate about an industry, you would be talking about it and engaging on it in your social media. And then, of course, your social media links should be added to your resume when they reflect your professional life. Increasingly, people always ask about the line between professional and personal, and everything is really findable. So I personally I might have like a private account somewhere, but I would probably, most of my social media is stuff that my employer could see. And that's one thing we advise in the handout is really not scraping, but being aware of what an employer sees when they Google you, when they look at your posts. Because that is something that is pretty commonplace now, that there is that quick look. Obviously, you should be yourself and you shouldn't worry about having particular passions as far as like politics or anything. It's really more, you're bringing your whole self to work now. And I think that your social media presence can reflect you professionally and personally simultaneously. But that being said, I do work with a lot of people who have a private account. They just kind of keep work outside of that, and they don't put those on their resume. So this is a quick snapshot illustrating the career library that I was talking about in terms of these 50 handouts that we have in the Career Center, or on our website. We also have 15 videos. I want to quickly, let me see, what's my next slide? It's my thank you slide. I went really fast. Why, you don't want to be on my Teams. Sorry, I'm clicking all the wrong windows. Let me stop sharing and ask if anyone has a question about LinkedIn, social media, networking.
The one thing is, if you are uncomfortable with what you do share on social media, there are ways on Facebook, etc., to temporarily suspend your account. Mm-hmm. I know my niece, who is now a teacher, when she was looking for a job, did exactly that.
Oh yeah, and that's the thing too. There are industries where there will be a different lens on that search. Absolutely. I think teaching is a great example of really, they're held to a standard that I don't know that other employers could hold you to. And I can't even imagine how stressful it would be to be teaching from home, and have, like parts of your life exposed to your employers and your,
Staying relatively sane.
and parents. Like that's what I would worry about, is like our parents, watching this. But, and Teachers of TikTok is truly the best TikTok content on the whole app. But yeah, and I think like younger people, I feel like millennials fall in this gap where they have to think about this. Gen Zers don't trust anybody. They already know that they're like, I have mine, and then I have this public persona. That's why I think, things like Snapchat were so popular for a while, because it did disappear. But I do think that increasingly, I know even in my career, I work in higher ed career centers. We are easily 10 years behind technology-wise in higher ed than other employers. We have thought leaders who, if you don't know what they're putting on Twitter, like if you don't know what Christine Cruz Vergara or Farouk or any of these like kind of career center celebrities are doing, you're going to be at a disadvantage against a candidate who does. So that's part of the process. And it's not necessarily, the thing about networking is it shouldn't be a thing you do right before you do your search, or it should be part of the practice, really. It should be just part of how you navigate career management across your whole career. In terms of, can you talk more about networking meetings, information interviews, what kind of goals might be helpful? Absolutely. The way that I talk about informational interviews is your goal is a conversation, right? That's really the first goal, because you don't know what you're going to get out of it. And it is important that everyone feels like it's not transactional, right? Because we don't want to feel like we're just, I hope she gets me a job, right? Usually it's hearing about their experience. And that's what makes them feel comfortable to talk about that, because they're like, well, I don't know all the trends in the industry, right? But I do know what I know. So you go into it really prepared to have a conversation, but you also go into it prepared to make an ask at the end that doesn't feel transactional. And some of this is like how you do it and how, the style with which you approach it. But typically at the end of a conversation, you're going to kind of go organically with where you're headed. You're going to say, this has been so helpful. I loved hearing about this. Is there anyone else you think I should connect to? And they might have a name for you. I mean, that's where you're really getting in that web of network. They might have a name for you there, or they might go, let me think about it. And then you follow up with them. Or you could also, depending on what happened in the conversation, you could say something like, this has been great. I loved hearing about this. Do you know of any open opportunities currently at your employer? Like, you can do that at the end, because by the end of it, you've built a rapport with them, and it is about how you do it. I think that people don't realize how common this is. This is super common. People my age are like, this is crazy. Who wants to do this? And yes, I see your comment, Stephen. Yeah, there's also a book about networking for introverts. What I'll do is, when I send the follow-up email to everyone who RSVP'd, I will include a couple of these book recommendations in here. And also maybe, I think I recently saw an article about it as well. It does feel awkward at first, but once you get into it, and again, us being on Zoom kind of makes this easier. So for me, I would say take advantage of this. I don't have to drive from my suburb into Evanston or into wherever. Like, they don't have to go anywhere either. So the convenience and the availability is great. But again, because we're in a pandemic and we're all stressed out about, politics, I think it's worthwhile, like, how are you doing? Like, do you have a family in school? Like, you can ask questions like that to be a person. My other tip is, like, obviously go into it as a conversation. You can end with a little bit of tactic at the very end. And then any follow-up that you do, let's say you talk to someone who's like, you know what, I think we're going to be hiring someone in like 3 months. And then you like store that in the back of your head. If you follow up with someone like a month or two later, the only thing you need to make sure you do every time you follow up with them is add value. Like, literally, one example would be, you would find a quick article from Harvard Business Review, you know, in the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks and go, I was reading this and I thought of our conversation. Like you would have to relate it back to something, but that really, that's a style choice that makes them feel like you're being authentic and you're taking their time seriously and you're not just kind of like hoping they can link you with someone. Now, if you have a rapport, they're going to want to do that anyway, and you're gilding the lily at that point. But I worked, my previous institution was Wellesley College, and that is an all women's school in Boston, or outside of Boston. And their network, I mean, that's the beauty of an all women's school. All they want to do is help each other get jobs. Like that is their dream. But they were also really obsessed with manners. I think it's like an East Coast thing. So they loved being able to, you know, if I'm going to follow up with someone and ask them a question that seems like a favor for me, I'm going to say like, oh, I heard this podcast and it reminded me of our conversation. I'm going to layer a little bit of gratis into that so that it's not just an ask. Does that make sense? I learned a lot of etiquette, East Coast etiquette in Boston. Other questions about the networking? Have you guys seen, like, I can't even attend all the webinars that are going on right now. And one very recent trend, I get like 8 LinkedIn requests after every webinar. And if you're not in the chat, this sounds really insane. Maybe this is more higher ed than anything. I was just in a webinar and they didn't have, you know, the audience members weren't participating, but we were all active in the chat. And I was like, oh, at DePaul, we do this and blah, blah, blah. I had like so many LinkedIn requests that were like, oh, I want to hear more about this thing you're doing. Like that is, you should be connecting after these events on LinkedIn, because LinkedIn obviously restricts your view to people who you've connected to. I mean, obviously there's like a layer for a second, third, and depending on what access you have, but please do take advantage of that while you're going to webinars in your field. And if you're not sure how to find them, my pandemic pro tip is using the Google search settings. If you don't actually use the settings and then limit your search to the last 2 weeks, I literally would type in an industry or the word industry event, you know, the like marketing event, and then I'll limit my search to the last 2 weeks. That's been a real Google search. That's my Google search trick right now, is the settings tool. Any other questions? I want to make sure you guys know about upcoming events. We do have an event. Let me pull it up real quick so I can tell you the date. The one I'm most excited about, frankly, is the project managing the job search. There's 2 that I'm really excited about. That's November 18th. I'm going to just put the handshake link in the chat. That one is truly just like 45 minutes of how to make the search and the networking and all of this efficient and not a waste of your time. Because I think that tailoring materials is time intensive, and one of the biggest barriers for folks who are in a job search or thinking about searching for a job is the time commitment. And we have a lot of tips and tricks that were, at least I learned the hard way in terms of moving from the East Coast and then coming back. The other one that I want to pitch tonight is we have a skills lab. Depending on your industry, this may or may not be useful to you, but we have a skills lab coming up called Creative Resume Design. And that is we're going to talk about the spectrum between conservative, very traditional resumes to kind of stylish design resumes, and how most successful ones land in the middle. I will say accounting is the exception. They love the good old Times New Roman, but we're going to talk about like what are the boundaries of resume design. Because I think that's, if you can get through an applicant tracking system and someone looks at it, that's another opportunity to really create immediacy around the work that you're doing. And I think that people, now that we're looking at them on screens, the rules have changed a lot. I'm sorry, you can hear my son yelling at a video game. All right, any other questions? Let me really quickly, I know I keep acting like I'm going to end this. Let me do one more look and see what my masterclass is next. I should know this. but today's my birthday and I'm not going to be held responsible for knowing anything today. All right, the next one is December 2nd, and it is remote work technology. So we'll talk about, particularly with a focus on real-time communication tools like Slack and Teams, and I'll also talk about project management technology like Asana or Trello. Please, if you have any ideas for future masterclass, I have a lot of ideas, but if you have any specific topics you think we should do, I like doing these because it's a little more advanced than what we're doing for our current students. So please feel free to challenge me, either email me or throw it in the chat if you've got an idea now. But I will be sending a follow-up email probably by Friday to everyone who's RSVP'd, so you could reply to that as well. And I normally would be giving you a poll for this event, but I forgot to do it. So I'm gonna say I gave myself all 10s tonight because it's my birthday. So I hope I get what I want tonight. All right, that's it. Thank you so much. Before I say anything political, no one wants to hear that. Thank you so much for coming tonight. And I hope to see you at our future